Right, hello and welcome to another Lit Matters. This video here is going to be on Jekyll and Hyde, the big picture. I'm going to try to be showing you some of the context and influences behind Stevenson's classic novel, some of the ideas and the themes that are in the background, some of the things that may have inspired him and influenced him to write The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay. So the breakdown here, we're going to look at perhaps the original Dr. Jekyll, some of the science, the crime, confusion that surrounds it, sin, sex and chivalry, what a trio, then some grave robbing, some influences and precursors for it, as well as duality and perhaps the Bacchae. Whether you need to know the context for an exam or whether you just want to know some of the backstory behind it, then hopefully this is the video for you. I've always found that knowing some of the influences and the history and the context makes it much more memorable, much more interesting. Okay, so we start off with a bit of the original Dr. Jekyll, and the character is based on a man called John Hunter, Dr. John Hunter. There are a couple of references to him in the text. Now he is Jekyll's house. The reference is that it's bought from an anatomist from the 1700s, and that is in fact Dr. John Hunter. Now who was he? Well, he was a medical pioneer. He was someone breaking down boundaries of medicine and applying scientific methods to medicine at a time when people were just using leeches, and he changed the face of medicine, basically carefully observing the outcomes of operations and doing tests and experiments on bodies and corpses, understand how diseases worked, understand better how the human body worked. He'd often get sort of animal specimens sent to him from around the world and have this strange array of skulls and skeletons lying on his experiment table, and would show this off to the public. And it became a sort of a popular museum of human and animal body parts. And he'd have these hearts and these skulls all over the place. But he was breaking boundaries. He was doing things that no one had done before and advancing the understanding of medicine and anatomy. But in his time, he's considered dangerous. He's considered ungodly, presumably pretty messy and controversial. But he's also visionary. He's also doing things that no one has ever done before. And there's echoes of all of these things in the character of Dr. Jekyll. From one perspective, he's dangerous and arrogant and playing God. From another perspective, he's reaching higher than anyone else has done before him, and there's a Promethean quality to him here. So if you don't know, look up the Greek myth Prometheus, about the Titan that stole fire from the gods, who was taking hidden knowledge, dangerous knowledge, controversial knowledge that was denied, taking it down from Mount Olympus to give it to people. And there's an element of that in Dr. John Hunter and in Dr. Jekyll, and I think you got there the HJ reflection. And his house, you can see on the right there, is a map of Dr. John Hunter's house, and you've got the sort of front door at the bottom, and then the back door at the back where it says west. At the top where it says west, and in the middle you've got this theatre. And this is Jekyll's house. This is the one Jekyll's house is modelled on. But you have here the essence of Jekyll and Hyde. At the front, it's very grand and it's very impressive, and at the back, it's dark and it's a bit dodgy. Because to do these experiments, to understand better about the human body, he needed human bodies to practice on, and you couldn't bring that through the front door in those times. It had to come in through the back door. And this is very much like a metaphor for Jekyll and Hyde's personality. On the surface, he is one thing, outwardly impressive and respectable, but lurking on the inside, there's something more questionable, more dangerous, more interesting going on. And Dr. John Hunter himself was a hands-on experimentalist, just like Jekyll, who ends up trying his potions out on himself. Partly through just sort of extreme commitment to his art, to his science, partly because perhaps there's a selflessness there. He doesn't want to do it on other people. He thinks it's so dangerous, and they both come to a sticky end. Dr. John Hunter, I think, manages to infect himself with some venereal disease when studying them and trying to learn about their effects. and obviously Jekyll comes to his own sticky end. So there's lots of parallels between Dr. John Hunter and Dr. Jekyll. Right, moving on to some science swirling around in the mid to late Victorian period, and principally you need to understand a bit about Darwin and evolution and the theory of natural selection, because that's written in 1859. Darwin publishes Origin of the Species, and this has a seismic effect. It rocks the Victorian establishment. It shakes them to their foundations, and it provokes all sorts of questions. Okay, it makes obvious that Homo sapiens, human beings, are not the chosen ones necessarily. That we are not perfect, and there's lots of things that follow on from Darwin's discoveries, and it scares people, and it makes them question everything they thought they knew, and it makes them, for once, suddenly not feel so superior and so perfect and chosen and close to God, but makes them feel maybe a bit uncertain of themselves. Perhaps before Darwin, a Victorian white Christian male thought he had won the life's lottery. He thought he was all the most desirable things. These Victorian gentlemen could do what they want and go where they want, and they went around the world colonizing and converting, and thought that they were superior for being male, for being white, for being Christian, for being British. And Darwin's Origin of Species is one of those texts that maybe punctures some of that Victorian British establishment arrogance. It maybe provokes questions that we may have invented God, and if so, where do we come from? What's the point of us? And meaning of life? What's going on? So this would have terrified the Victorian establishment, but it maybe would have provoked more honest conversations about what are we really like and what is natural for us. And up to that point, perhaps influences such as the church, or influences such as establishment or the patriarchal social structures had convinced people that it was natural to be good, or to be holy, or to be pure, or perhaps to not listen to your desires, or not respond to your human needs, your biological needs, whether that be sexual attraction or any other, and particular types of sexual attraction. And so it throws open a whole world of possibilities that maybe we are more animalistic than we like to think. Maybe we are more barbaric, and there is far less that separates us from Neanderthals, or from cavemen, or even from the great apes and other species than they like to think. And this is in the background in terms of Hyde representing Jekyll's darker side, his desires, his things that he really wants to do, but society won't let him do. More on that in the issue of chivalry and being a gentleman later. But science is achieving all sorts of incredible things in the Victorian period. You have cameras and photographs. You have telecommunications. You have the start of trains and transport networks, petrol-driven engine. You have Nobel inventing dynamite. You have stamps being created in the 1840s. You have all sorts of scientific advancements that are radically changing society and making humans' understanding of themselves and their place in society or in history very, very different. So lots of things become possible. You think about something like magnetism or electromagnetism. Before you understand about magnets look like magic. They look inexplicable and insane. So science at this time is very influential, and it's very dangerous, and it's very exciting. And there is no sense that they think they have understood everything. All sorts of things are being discovered. So it's not entirely beyond the realms of possibility that you could find a drug that might alter your personality. And indeed, we have many drugs, antidepressant drugs, hallucinogenic drugs, and others nowadays that do exactly that. So Stevenson's premise is not that far-fetched, really. Another influence in the background, this is a bit of a detective novel, in a sense, and that in some sense it reads like a whodunit. Detectives and inspectors were quite a new thing in sort of the mid-Victorian period, the mid-1800s. British Prime Minister Robert Peel invents the police force. The Met Police is invented in around the 1840s sometime, and thereafter you have detectives, or professional police. After I don't know how many years of policemen chasing villains and robbers and bad uns up and down the street with their clubs and truncheons, at some point they realise you're going to need more professional, serious forensic people investigating crimes. And at the start they're seen as weirdos. They're seen as like snoopers and nosy parkers sticking their nose into business that's not theirs. But obviously they grow and grow, and now how much fiction, be it in films or TV shows or books, is based around detective fiction and crime fiction. And so Stevenson is really kind of getting in on the ground floor not that long after Edgar Allan Poe is publishing Murders in the Rue Morgue, and Dupin or Conan Doyle is creating the character of Sherlock Holmes. Stevenson is creating Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It reads like a whodunit. And you get the start of criminology at this time as well. They first start to realise footprints can identify a person. The word clue comes into the English language. There's a great book about suspicions of Mr. Witcher you might want to read, where they murder, a true murder story with one of the first detectives and how it all happened. And the greatest criminal, in the sense of size and magnitude and notoriety or infamy of Victorian period, is of course Jack the Ripper, which he was 1888. He was on his killing spree, and Jekyll and Hyde is 1886. And there was even a thought that Jekyll and Hyde inspired Jack the Ripper, and Jack the Ripper was perhaps a copycat killer, having read Jekyll and Hyde or having seen Jekyll and Hyde. Indeed, there was Jekyll and Hyde was so popular, there was a West End show put on of it, and this had to be shut down because they thought that it was provoking murderers like Jack the Ripper to murder in the streets, and the reason the justification for this theory was that Jack the Ripper was clearly quite an educated person. He wasn't hacking up the bodies in a random fashion. He was quite precisely and surgically removing body parts. Like, he knew his way around a human body, and he was quite anatomically educated, kind of carefully removing organs in a chilling way. So he wasn't just a rogue thug on the streets. He must have had a degree of education, and therefore it creates that more scary prospect that the gentleman walking down the street by night might be a psychopathic murderer. And this idea of the sort of the duality of man, and as well that the high class doing something very, very low class in terms of murder, was more of a possibility.